Cool. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on a Monday afternoon for Hilchot Purim. So we are up to Purim. Finally, we've done Shabbat Zachor. We discussed Tani Tester. Thank you to everybody who sent in questions, some interesting questions which we'll discuss as well. Again, if you have anything specific coming up to Purim, please just send me the questions and we'll discuss those. We are now on to, as I said, the day of Purim, or the night of Purim, first of all, 4 mitzvot of the day, as we know, 4 mems. We're going to start off talking a little bit about the Mishte and Seuda, the Purim Feast, which is going to be a little bit different this year as it would in any other year. Let's talk about it. So first of all, there is an obligation, there is a chiyuv to have a festive meal on Purim. But this is different to what we do on Shabbat. It's different to what we do on Yom Tov. Purim, as you all know, is not a Yom Tov in the traditional sense, in that you can do melacha on the day. You can open your computer, you can log into Zoom, which will be very useful. Other things as well. But nonetheless, we have and it's a separate obligation, unlike on Shabbat or Yom Tov, where we have sort of Kvod Shabbat or Kvod Yom Tov, that we have to eat a meal or 2 meals. So in Purim, we have a meal, but it has a different sort of character. In the Megillah, if you look in the second last parak, you'll find at least 4 times the phrase that's used, you may Mishte v'simcha, simcha v'mishte, mishte v'simcha, switches around in some of the psukim. It means a day of happiness and feasting. Very interestingly, again, Mishte comes from the word shtia, meaning the emphasis somewhat on the drinking, maybe more than just the eating itself. But there we go. So we have a festive meal. What's interesting, I just want to read to you the language of one of the Rishonim, just one line, so don't worry. But it's from the Rishonim, actually one of the Gaonim, Rav Achai Gaon in his Hilchot. He says as follows. He says, "Machayvin de Beit Yisrael lemecha lemishte b'Purim." In other words, there is an obligation to eat and drink on Purim. And there is also to give thanks and to give praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu about all the miracles that he did to us. So this is a meal which is not just about eating and drinking. Of course, any meal that we have, which is mitzvah, should never be just about eating and drinking, but very much it's about giving thanks, it's about giving praise, thanking Hashem, and that should be part of the meal. That should be part of the characteristic. It's not just that a person eats a big lunch, or a person eats a big breakfast, or whatever it is on Purim Day, but throughout the meal, there should be adequate sort of content. One should be talking, one should be singing, one should be thinking about the miracles that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did for us on Purim and does for us always. So one aspect of the halakha, the Rama brings that just before you start the meal, it's good to engage in a little bit of Torah. You should tell some divrei Torah, do a little bit of learning. For obvious reasons, anybody who's experienced a few Purim Seudas in their time, a little bit later on the meal, that becomes a bit more difficult. But at the beginning of the meal, certainly that should be done. The Rama actually writes that if one does so, that will help to protect them throughout the meal, that they don't do anything that they will heavily come to regret later on, or miss out on any mitzvot or things like that. So that's in terms of the nature of the meal. When should we be having this meal? So first of all, the meal's during the day. Not at night time. The Rambam writes that one who eats his Purim meal at night has not fulfilled his obligation. It has to be done during the day. Having said that, there is an opinion in the Rishonim, an opinion of the Rav Yah. It's very famous because what he said about leaning on Purim, on Pesach. Sorry, we'll get to before Pesach. But the Rav Yah also says that there is a mitzvah to eat on Purim night as well. And the Rama brings this. He says it's not an obligation, but it's good to have a little bit extra, a little bit. It doesn't take the place of a meal in the day, but good to eat a little bit celebratory spirit on Purim night also. When on Purim Day should we be having this meal? So in ordinary years, when it's not on a Friday, so there's a bit more of a discussion whether it should be in the morning, whether it should be in the afternoon. Usually what's done is that people would have their Purim meal in the afternoon, sort of while it's still daytime and carrying on to the night. This year, for obvious reasons, on a Friday, so we can't really do that. And all the poskim right on a Friday, one should have their meal in the morning, one should start before Chatzot. That's the right time to have it. There is a minhag in Yerushalayim, what's called a Prosma Palma Kadesh, where you would start the meal later on and then you would have Kiddush as part of that. But that is not really the practice in most places. And certainly, so this year, the Purim Seuda should be done in the morning. Another aspect that the Rishonim point out, it's actually very interesting. Learn from the Megillah that there is, again, and this is in ordinary years, this is not for coronavirus years. So I'll get to practical halacha in a moment, which we should do this year. Let me just say so that there's no misunderstanding. We should not be going to other people's houses or inviting people or getting large gatherings this year. We should not do that. That is not safe. We did that last year. Unfortunately, we found out afterwards that what kind of an effect that may have had. But ordinarily, there is actually an inyan of joining together, of not just having a meal by yourself, you and your family, but actually joining together with other families, with other friends. The pasuk in the Megillah talks about called Medina or Medina, mishpacha or mishpacha, families and families. So it's learned out from there. And that's if we go back to what we said at the beginning, that the point of this meal is not just to eat and drink, it's not just gastronomic pleasure, but it's also about giving thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the miracles. And the best way that we give thanks is publicly. When somebody would bring a korban todah. So you would bring a korban todah in the Beit HaMikdash, you would have to bring 40 loaves with it, and those 40 loaves would have to be consumed within 24 hours. How could one person ever consume 40 loaves within 24 hours? The answer is they can't. You've seen sometimes, in Hendon Park, they have this, they have the sushi challenge, come and eat 100 pieces of sushi and then you get them all free. But the problem is what happens if you manage to eat 99 and then you don't get the last one. But you get these challenges. Even somebody who could get the 100-piece sushi challenge, I think 40 loaves in 24 hours is impossible. And the point is, the Torah is teaching us, when you have things you want to give praise, the way to do it, you need to do it publicly. You need to share it. So a person has to come and bring their 40 loaves, invite all their family, invite all their friends, bring everybody to the Beit HaMikdash. Everybody gets a loaf or half a loaf or whatever it is, and then you can finish. And that's how you should celebrate. So too, in ordinary years, same thing on Purim, same thing on Pesach. We want to share in the story. We want to publicize it as widely as possible. And therefore, we would join together for a meal. Obviously, this year, we can't do that. It's neither safe nor legal nor advisable. Therefore, this year, people should be having their Purim Seuda by themselves at home. What we can do, again, like I said at the beginning, Purim is not Pesach, it's not a Yom Tov. You certainly can join on Zoom, and we can use that in order to, although it's a substitute for the real thing, but this year, that's what we can use to join together with others, to celebrate, to share in those, in that Hoda'ah v'Shevach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, what do we need to eat at the Purim Seuda? We'll talk, I think drinking maybe we'll talk about tomorrow. But what do we need to eat? So generally speaking, two things which comprise a Seuda in many, many contexts are bread and meat. On Purim, would one be required to have bread and meat at their Seuda? So first of all, regarding meat, most of the poskim actually say that yes, one should have meat at the Purim Seuda. That's what the Rambam says, what the Shulchan Aruch says. Again, it's also this, that generally we know we have a statement of Chazal that says, Ein simcha ela b'basar v'yayin. Whenever we have simcha, whenever we have happiness, the way we do that is through meat and wine. Famous discussion as to whether meat refers to korbanot shlamim, when the Beit HaMikdash stood and a person would bring korbanot and eat that meat, that's what it's referring to, or just any meat, person likes meat. So in the context of Yom Tov, we often say that nowadays that obligation to eat meat would not necessarily apply. When it comes to Purim, most of the poskim do feel that one should have meat if possible. Obviously, this year it's a little more difficult because the Seuda is in the morning. So there are some opinions. There are some achronim who disagree. Who say one does not have to have meat. Everybody agrees that you should have a nice lavish meal. It should be a little bit more than you would have, ordinarily for breakfast or for lunch, whatever it is. If a person doesn't like meat or a person's vegetarian, they don't have to force themselves to try and eat meat. Now, that would be the point is not to make life difficult, but the point is that generally meat is a lavish food. It's something which people want to celebrate. They have a simcha, they have meat. So if one can, one should. But if one can't, and if that's not the way that one enjoys, then that would be all right as well. What about bread? So interesting discussion in terms of bread. We know that, again, in the days of Chazal, having a Seuda, having a meal was qualified by eating bread. Nowadays, our eating habits have changed a little bit, but on Shabbat and Yom Tov, we would always wash. And really the measure of this is when one adds something into Birkat HaMazon. So on Purim, we have to say Ala Nisim. The question would be, if a person forgot to say Ala Nisim, would they then have to go back and bench again and say Ala Nisim? And the rule for these things is always that if it's a meal which one was obligated to have, one was obligated to eat bread, then one would have to go back and say that but which they forgot. So for example, on Shabbat, a person forgot to say Ritzei when they benched, only realized when they finished, they would have to bench again because they were obligated to have that meal. So the Rambam writes that if a person forgot to say Ala Nisim, they don't have to go back and bench again. They don't have to say it. And we can learn from there that according to Rambam, there is no obligation of having bread at the Purim Seuda. Other poskim disagree. There are poskim who say that one would have to go back. Lamaisa, in practical terms, we would not bench again because we say Sefek Brachot Lakel. However, Tzonia is a good thing, and most poskim would agree that one should have, if it's at all possible, one should have bread at their Purim Seuda. So, bread, both bread and meat are desirable at the moment if one can. Tomorrow we will talk about wine.